All right, welcome to the 7.1 webinar. First of all, just shout out to Emily G for recording all of these webinars so far. This has proven to be really challenging. So this is a really exciting time in the curriculum. Students have just returned from the mid-year hackathon, and it is a great time to do a culture check-in, culture reflection, and potentially a culture reset. But I feel like it's never not a great time for those things. So regardless of where you are in your programs and with your curriculum, I think that these are really great things to keep in mind. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the actual slides because I feel like they're very straightforward, and I want to try to focus more on the things that aren't in the slides. And so I know a lot of us come from an education background, but I just wanted to touch on this idea of the hidden curriculum versus the actual curriculum. So the actual curriculum is what is being delivered in the lesson and what is on the slides, whereas the hidden curriculum is a lot of the other things. It's not necessarily the culture, but it's things like the physical environment and what's being reinforced to students through peer-to-peer relationships or educator-to-student relationships. So it's this idea of like what's not in the lesson. And an example of this that came up for me recently was we received curriculum feedback from someone about how we, in the slides, instruct students to Google something when they get stuck. But we don't explicitly teach this. And I think that there are a lot of really great opportunities in the curriculum to model this for students. And so I think about where I might coach volunteers or lead teachers. So like at the beginning of Unit 3, we offer students the option of using the hover attribute in CSS. And it's not something that we explicitly teach, but we tell them to Google it. And so that might be a place where I would have a lead teacher or volunteer model how to Google to use the hover feature before introducing that hover feature, if that's something that you have time for. Another thing that I think about with this dichotomy of like hidden curriculum versus actual curriculum is building relationships. We spent a lot of time in the volunteer training talking about building relationships, and I think it's something that we need to continue to coach volunteers on throughout the year, especially at this point in the curriculum, Unit 7, because things are starting to get a lot harder, and we want to create a space where students feel safe so that they can struggle and have a productive struggle with these really challenging concepts. And so building relationships becomes really important at this point, and it is going to stay really important. And so if we're building relationships in October, they're going to carry us through to Unit 7 when things are getting tough for students. I would also add here a personal reflection. In the Fellowship 2 curriculum planning meeting, one of the volunteers was joking that he didn't really know what kinds of TV shows kids like to watch. And I thought that was really funny because my initial reaction would have been, well, maybe try asking students what kinds of TV shows they watch, because that feels like an easy entry point to building relationships. And so that was like a quick coaching moment there. And so moving on from that, I think that we don't have algorithms in the actual curriculum, but I feel like this is a great opportunity for a volunteer who probably feels very passionate about what they do with computer science to introduce algorithms in a way that's meaningful to them. I also feel like this lesson gives us an opportunity to take the content and make it relevant to students, but we can't do that unless we really know who our students are. And so that's another reason why building relationships is really important throughout the year. So on that note, I've provided a few resources to talk about algorithms with students. Volunteers might produce other examples as well. The first example here is a link to a Khan Academy lesson. It talks about different examples of where algorithms show up in our lives. So things like the Facebook newsfeed algorithm, or Google Maps, or Pixar using rendering to display computer animations. And then when we think about algorithms more abstractly, we think about like, what's the algorithm for brushing your teeth, or for getting ready in the morning, or for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So there are lots of different ways you can take that what is an algorithm lesson. There are also a few books. The first link there is like a 2-minute video on algorithms, and then the other two are books that have come out recently about implicit bias and how algorithms can sometimes be harmful. Let's see. I'd say that the last one here, implicit bias in AI, is something that we talked about a lot in Hello Girl last year, and we had a really great opportunity with that because in the cities of San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, they outlawed the use of facial recognition technology in law enforcement. And so we were able to take a concept that was technical, and we worked really hard to abstract it for students, and then tried to make it relevant to their lived experiences and the place that they called home. And that was something that we were able to do because we formed really meaningful relationships in that Hello Girl community. And so that's just an example of how we're taking these concepts and ideas and making them meaningful for students, because we want our learning to be relevant and meaningful. So I don't want to harp too much on the slides that students see, but I think that this slide often gets overlooked, and I'm guilty of this. And I think sometimes when they are preparing the lesson, volunteers overlook this. But that first bullet point to me is very important. This is the first time we are formally talking about programming and JavaScript. HTML and CSS are not programming languages. They don't carry out a set of instructions for a computer. They're just so HTML is a markup language, so it's only providing like the structure. CSS is giving it that style, but it's not actually telling the computer to do anything. And so this is a really big deal. This is the first time that students are learning a programming language. It's very exciting. And so I think that by taking some of these resources on algorithms, we can coach volunteers to take programming and make it relevant to students, because it is kind of a pivot in the year, which is why it's after the hackathon. The other slide that I wanted to talk about was the objective slide. I think that sometimes in some programs, we do tend to skip over sharing the objective with students. And this is another time when we want to make sure that we're being really intentional about making the learning relevant. And so I know that because we all come from an education background, we don't always coach volunteers on sharing the objective with students. And then here, this is another place where I think we run into that hidden actual curriculum of this is something new in the curriculum this year, of having like project celebration and acknowledging students. And it's a great way to bring in a really positive culture and bring in our Code Nation culture of celebrating loudly and bringing a lot of joy into our classroom environment. And so I think it's really important to be intentional about how we are celebrating and how we're choosing to celebrate in class. And so that's it for 7.1, and just a few coaching notes on where we're going with the curriculum here.